What's up? So if you've been following my channel for any amount of time, you know that I recently got a lot into the DIY part of squonking or vaping, and started off a very simple. It started off in a very simple way. Basically, when I started buying a lot of high-end mods, I realized that a lot of these high-end mods, upon arrival, already had issues, right? So, the most common issue is that the magnets fall off after a while. And then other issues like, you know, sparks from the mechanical mod, the 510 doesn't work properly, etc. Some tolerance issues, things don't fit. Surprisingly high-end, but you still, at the end of the day, you have to work on it a little bit or send it back to the modder to get it fixed. But for me, that's not an option because sending it back will cost another 30, 40 US dollars. Some of them ship back to you for free, some don't. So it's just it's a waste of money. So I started up that way, just trying to learn how to modify my starboard mechanical mod to a better 510, to a ModMaker 510, etc. And that led me to actually building my own Squonk mods from ModMaker design. That was the first ones I did. I did a few other mechanical 3D printed Squonk mods as well. Of course, you can check the DIY series on my channel or on geekay.com to get the full series from the start. Now, then eventually, the last one I did was the DNA65C Squonk mod by Analog Box Mod. That was my first first regulated Squonk mod that I did. There was a huge gap between that and all previous videos because it involved soldering, and I sucked at soldering. I just had to learn that thing. Soldering is like a big obstacle, hurdle to me. So I did it. The DNA75C by Analog Box Mods, that was it gave me a lot of confidence to do this project that I have been teasing you on Facebook and many other places. I think if you follow me long enough, you should have seen the progress by now. But today we're going to do the DIY series DNA60 by Floris. It's the Big Orca regulated DNA60 Squonk mod. So where you can go and pick it up, of course, it will be at Floris. It's at boxmod.ecwid.com, or you can check the link in the description box below. And then you have really to browse through some of the categories, etc., to find the product, and you can actually buy the enclosure itself from Floris. Floris, however, only sells the enclosures, so that's another reason why this video took so long compared to the ABM Analog Box Mods. It came in a kit with the enclosure, with the DNA75C, the wires, the keystone contacts, everything. With this, I had to figure out where to get, for example, where I want to get the DNA60 from, and the wires and all the keystone contacts, etc. It took me a really long time. At Floris, he sees himself only as like a manufacturer, a factory that makes the enclosures, and he doesn't provide anything else. You cannot get a DNA60 board from his website, or the wires, nothing. All those things you have to get separately, and I will put up on my website or in the description box below where you can go and get those things. The wires, the keystone contacts, what else? The magnets, etc. All those things you have to get by yourself. Now, this is going to be a long video because it's a DIY video. I don't want to just cut and show you this completed stuff. I'm going to have to make you suffer and watch as I fail in some parts. I think there's a lot you can learn from that. But I will tell you the cost right away so that you don't have to wait. So the cost of today's DIY project, the DNA60 Big Screen Orca by Floris, it's going to be about 59 euros. Now, the specific variation that I got was white Delrin, no dye. There's an option to dye it if you want to. That costs a little bit more, with carbon fiber faceplate for a 2700 to 21700 battery. And I got it cut for a ModMaker 510 Squonk hole. and I also paid for engraving at the back. All those things cost a little bit more, and so the total price that I paid was 59 euros for the enclosure, i.e. the body. That comes up to about 70 US dollars. And then I had to go and buy the DNA60. That costs 60 US dollar. I mean, the price on the Evolve website probably costs a little bit more if you buy from any other resellers, or probably a little bit less, but it's around that price. 60 bucks for the Evolve DNA60 large screen and USB module or charger. Right, so 60 and 70, that comes up to about $130, and then you should just put in another 30 bucks for the ModMaker 510 keystone contacts and the wires. Yeah, those are the most important stuff. So that comes up to total cost about what, 70, 60, 130, let's say $150 is the cost to do this DIY project. Not including the tools. The tools, we don't get into that. Not including the solder, of course. Yeah, so if you're starting from absolute zero, that's going to cost you a lot more. But the price is about 100, 160, 150, depends on which option you get. It's available for 18650 as well, but I didn't want to get the 18650. I wanted to get the 20700/21700. So that's the price. So let's do it. Let's do the DIY for the big screen Orca by Floris Box. Alright guys, so let's zoom out and get a bigger picture of what we really need here. Let me just clear my table. So to assemble the Floris Box DNA60 2700 Squonk mod, these are the tools that you need. Okay, so first of all, you would need to get the Floris DNA60 enclosure. Now I'll talk about the cost later on in FaceTime, but basically when you get the enclosure for this DNA60 option, there's only the option of getting the white body, and there's an additional option of getting it dyed, and they have many colors for the dyes. And the reason I didn't get the dyed colors because I thought, well, if you're going to dye the white Delrin mod, I may as well do it myself. I may as well just get the white version undyed, and then just do whatever modifications that is required, and then I can dye it myself. The purpose or my goal for this was to have a red color DNA60 Squonk mod, and they do not have the black Delrin version, so it is only white or white and dyed, and they have many different color options there as well. Now when you go to their website, you can choose either the DNA60 options will be 18650 or 2700. Now as far as I know, the size is exactly the same, whether you choose 18650 or 2700. The only difference is the battery compartment here. As you can see, it's a bit recessed for the 2700 compared to the 18650. It is not as recessed as the 2700 version, but in terms of dimensions, it's going to be exactly the same. And also, you can determine the type of cutout that you want. Now this is a tricky part. You really have to know the measurements of your 510. In my case, I decided to use the ModMaker 510. So you got to know the measurement of the top and the measurement of the hole, how deep it is, etc., etc. Okay, so in my case, it's going to be 1 millimeter deep, and this should be about 9 millimeters, if I'm not mistaken, for the ModMaker 510. Of course, you can use many different 510s, anything you want, but you just need to know the measurement and get the measurement correct when you make the order. Now, this enclosure comes with a set of doors and a set of buttons. So when you get it, you can choose what type of doors you want. You can get a black carbon fiber. This is the red carbon fiber, although it looks kind of brown or maroonish to me. I expected it to be brighter red, right? And the faceplate as well. The magnets, as you can see, are already installed on the doors and on the body. It also comes with a set of buttons for your DNA60. So in my case, I got the red buttons, as you can see right here. So that will be one power button, right? And right away you can notice that the measurements, it really needs a lot of work for the carbon fiber panel. And at the back as well, if you can see, it's pretty rough. I see some glue marks or whatever marks. The door is not exactly the right measurement. I mean, it fits, but it's just a little bit off, about 0.2 millimeters off, as you can see right here. So what happens with the red door is because of the way it's designed. If you push it to the left flush, this just goes down because there's only a small part here that actually holds the door up. So the carbon fiber is not looking very good right now because I have to make some changes. I have to grind this out to fit the DNA60 power buttons, and also the wattage up, wattage down buttons, right? Actually, the wattage up, wattage down buttons, they look okay, as you can see, but not what I was expecting. In the pictures, at least, the red carbon fiber, it looks a little bit brighter than this, where it would actually match up with the red buttons, but this does not. So I also got an additional set of buttons, white, with the intention of actually having this as a backup. This I paid for separately, and these, I thought to myself, I would actually dye it some other color if I decide to make my mod a different color at the last minute. I also got a set of additional frosted doors and additional faceplate. Now there are many options on the Floris website. However, good luck in trying to find pictures of what some of these would look like. You can sort of guess, but on other type of options, it's a bit difficult. You're basically taking a risk, and you're not 100% sure what it's going to look like, right? So the frosted, for example, they have two type of clears. They have the opal white, and then they have the frosted. And I believe this is the frosted. The opal white is a little less see-through than this one right here, and it's okay actually, but the body is really good. At the back you see some engraving. This is an option for you as well. If you want to have some engraving, you can upload a file. I did upload a file. This is the alphabet, or this is the numbers design, right? And I would have wished for the numbers to be a bit bigger. So if you have a very large file that you want to engrave, and you only want a certain part of that file to be engraved, then you may as well crop it out to the correct size, right? Because I expected them to enlarge it a bit, so where the numbers are actually larger and more visible, but you can see, and because of how thin this wall is, right, because of the cutout for the 2700 battery, this part actually looks kind of transparent. With very thin layer remaining right here. Of course, other than that, you also need a DNA60 board. In my case, I have already test fitted it, right? So I have the DNA60 big screen version that also came with the USB charger, USB port for charging and firmware upgrades. Now, some places sell a DNA60 board without the USB, right? So you want to pay attention to that and make sure that you're getting the version with the USB. Now, other than that, you also need a ModMaker 510 or any 510 that you want to use. In my case, I'm most familiar with the ModMaker, especially since the ModMaker comes with these two tabs. The Mod Dog also comes with tabs, but it costs more than the ModMaker. And I got the 22mm washer for the ModMaker. How this thing works, I've covered before in previous videos. You may want to refer to those videos. Next, you need some wires, right? So I've got a 16 gauge wire right here for my previous project, 18 gauge wire for my previous project as well, and I had to go and buy 28 gauge wire, and I'll show you in a while where this 28 gauge wire goes. When you want to do something like this, it's recommended that before you start, you print out the Evolve DNA60 spec sheet from Evolve Vapor themselves. Explains everything you need to know about the DNA60 board, how it works, etc, etc. But most importantly, at the back right here is a guide on what type of wire gauges to use. So for the output from the board to the ModMaker positive, recommended is 14 gauge. I actually have 14 gauge wire. Let me zoom a little bit. I have 14 gauge wire on the way to me. If it reaches me by today, end of today, I will use a 14 gauge wire. but I do have 16 gauge wires, what I plan to use for the output, and it is minimum, so it's still okay. The recommended is 14. Now for the battery contacts to the board itself, I'm going to be using 18 gauge wire, and minimum is 20, right? And the 28 gauge is to connect these two parts of the DNA60 board. Let me just show you quickly, right? So since it comes in two parts, unlike a DNA75C or other types of boards from Evolve, you'd have to make a connection to use the USB port. Now the USB port in this layout is going to be like this. So you're going to charge it from the side of the mod, and you would need to connect the 5 holes that you see right here, all right, to the 5 holes. So I was initially a bit confused on how to wire this, but I did find sort of a sketch by someone that explains how to wire this up. And this is something that is unfortunately a bit tedious with the DNA60 instead of being a single piece. So I can't really test this out by plugging in the USB to see if the board works until I've done some soldering on the wires here, right? So from what I can see from the picture that I managed to download somewhere, I'm going to be using about 24 gauge wire for the positive and negative, right? Positive and negative of the charger into the positive and negative, and I'm going to be using 28 gauge wire for the 3 other holes that you see here. Now the 3 other holes is basically for your data transfer, right? So when you plug it in, you want to read eScribe, then you need the 3 other holes to be soldered right here as well, and then I'm going to be using 28 gauge wire. So the screen comes in a separate or detached. We will do it in the final stages, but basically you have to push this in and you have to push the tab back to hold the screen in place. And then, as you can see, the screen, well, thank God I didn't do that. And then the screen will be folded, something like this, right? Folded to the bottom part. And besides that, you also need to get some keystone contacts. So these are some that I have for I bought for my previous project, the Analog Box Mods. And then you can go to analogboxmods.ca to get these keystone contacts. You can also find them on eBay, etc. There are a few ways to do this. If you want to shape your own contact from a piece or a strip of beryllium copper, this actually I salvaged from my previous DIY Squonk mod projects. This is from ModMaker. You can do that as well. The only question is, how does it all fit into the mod? And then you see how much of room you have left. So the other tools that you need are, of course, a soldering iron to solder. And in order to make your life easier, you need some rosin flux for the soldering iron. You also need a pair of helping hands or alligator clips that I've explained in my previous video to actually hold the board, because these are small, tiny parts that we're talking about. And then you also need to really practice your soldering skills. So first, let's do a test fit of everything. Right? Now the DNA60, when you get it, it has these tabs attached to the side of it, something like that, right? And these are actually to hold the board. You can see 2 holes here, so you can use a screw if you want to secure the board onto your mod using a screw. However, I had to remove it because with those 2 things inside, the board doesn't fit, and it doesn't really need those 2 things. The enclosure, the enclosure is a very well measured, I would say. The DNA60 board, you can just push it in, comes out the back, right, and it just fits in really nice and snug right here, and this actually holds it in place. And now the USB charger, USB port is going to be here. Now this is not a very good fit. The USB port just sits there loosely like this. Now what you notice is that there are wire outlets that corresponds with the board. 2 on this side, 2 on that side, right? So your wires can come out here nicely, and then there's a cutout to accommodate your wires all the way up to the batteries itself. Now let me first show you the DNA60. So you have your power, you have your main switch right here, firing switch, and then you have your wattage down, wattage up, and these are all to connect to the USB port. Now if you look on top, it says out for the output, and right here is for ground. Okay, so that's where you connect the wire from your 510's ground to this wire right here, and everything is internally connected to the battery negative, as you can see right here. Okay, so if you do not want to use the USB module, then your batteries positive, you'll have to wire it here and solder it here, and the battery positive, you'll have to wire it here and solder it here. So when you put it this way, you can see that the battery positive wire is going to go in through here, battery negative is going to go in through here. So the battery positive wire would come out through this side, right? And the battery is going to be upside down, positive is going to be down. So the battery positive wire will come all the way here, and the battery negative wire would need to come all the way up. Alright, so there's two wires going to come here. One's going to go up, one's going to go down. On the other side, you have of course the output wire that's going to come up from this hole, and it's going to go to your atomizer positive, so it's going to be a very short connection. The ground is from the atomizer's ground, another very short wire right here. Okay, so the thing that you can actually do this in many different ways. I've seen people wire this. I had to ask around, and someone actually shared with me his DNA60 Floris, and the wiring is very simple using a solid core copper wire. These wires that I'm going to use are not the solid core type of wire. Those wires are exposed with no silicone tubing, etc., and they just basically just connect it and just solder it. And because it is a solid core wire, it actually helps to keep the board secure in place. So I do not have those wires, and I do not want to use it that way. I'm just going to be using the regular type of silicone wires. Now when you solder it, however, I will have to make my wires come inside from the back, alright, back for every single thing right here, and solder it that way. And the battery positive actually can also go through here, right? There's another hole here, right? So that's what I'll probably be using. The negative, I will just pull it down, negative right here, going to the top. The positive, I will run the wire through here into this part right here, and then connect to the battery itself, right? So the ModMaker 510 has two tabs. This will be the positive tab to connect the positive to the DNA60 board, and this will be the ground. I'm gonna put it in my 22mm washer, push it in like this. The ground tab will be here. There is another option that I did in my DNA75C, which is to use a single piece of copper or brass plate to act as the battery negative and also the ground, right? That will make sense. However, if I put in the copper plate, I would need to bend it a little bit, because when you look at the 2700 battery size, right, putting in the copper plate, there's still a lot of room on both sides, right? Now if I put in the copper plates on top and bottom, and also use the keystone contacts, I have measured it. It's a very, very tight fit, and I don't think I want to do it that way either. So I'm just going to be using the keystone contacts. Positive tab. So whenever you're doing something like this, it's very, very important that you really dry fit all the parts and try to visualize where the wires would go, and if you need to do anything specific or special. For example, the tabs, do you want to bend it down or not? So this will be the positive. The wire will come up from the back and just be soldered here. Okay, so if I want to, I can move it down, move the positive down out of view and solder it that way. However, there's also another wire that I'm supposed to run through here to the battery's negative. The ground connection is right here. Okay, I can move this up. So if I use the copper plate as I mentioned before, I only need to connect both the battery negative and the ground from the atomizer to the ground right here. I do not need to connect to the battery negative because this thing is internally connected. So many options. Again, no help from Floris on how to assemble this. I've asked him a few times, it just doesn't reply. So I'm just going to do it to the best of my ability. As I said, I've seen people do it in a very simple way with exposed wire, etc. I want to try to do it better. Okay, so I will use these two keystone contacts. I'm going to have to cut off the sharp pointy parts. One of the keystone contacts goes right here, right? And I can see that if I really want to, I can actually solder everything together. The negative tab for the 510, the ground tab for the 510, and negative of the battery, but you know, I don't think so. I want to do it that way. So with the battery, with the keystone contacts inside, as you will see now, it's going to be a very nice fit. The battery is not going to fall out, right? So saying before, if I put this copper plate inside and solder the keystone contacts onto the copper plate, whether it's at the bottom or the top, there's just no more room. There's just no more room. It's a very small mod, and it's going to be a very super tight fit. I have to basically force the battery in if I want to do that. There are of course other keystone contacts that these are the ones that I have, right? So make do with what I have. There is a room here for the DNA60 screen. So once you plug this in, you'll fold it. Oops, I always put this the wrong way. Once you plug this in, you'll fold it this way, and the DNA screen will sit pretty right here. And then you can press fit this, and we'll see how that works. This will be the final stages. The buttons fit really nicely on the frosted compared to the carbon fiber. Alright, so it's not going to stay in place by itself. I probably need to glue it. Right, and then buttons are all working. Right, including the power button. It's a bit sticky, this thing, so I need to take a sandpaper and either sand the button or sand the faceplate. I think I'll sand the faceplate because right now there's a lot of friction there, so it's not a very smooth operation. But this part needs to be widened. And then I would put this in. Any Squonk bottle will fit in here, no problem. Oh, it's not going to fit in at the moment because of the sharp pointy edges. Once I cut that out, this will fit in. And this is how my DNA60 will look like. I'm very tempted, as a lot of you have said from my previous video that I posted on Instagram, I'm very tempted to leave this as just a white mod. I know it looks good with the frosted, etc. And the carbon fiber also looks good on a white kind of setup. I don't know. White Delrin stuff, it's a bit tricky because it starts to get dirty after a while. It starts to get yellowish once, juice, once you have liquid on it. So I really don't know. I really wanted a red mod, and I do have a red dye, red synthetic dye at the back. And I would probably be able to get exact color like this, because this, if I believe, was white and they dyed it red. It's very easy to tell because the edges of it will be slightly darker. If you can see, when it's dyed, it always looks like this. Overall, it looks good, and the finished mod will look pretty good as well. But now the biggest challenge, of course, soldering. So at this point, I think I'll give you an update, guys, right? Because this thing has really taken up a lot of my time. Thankfully, this week I'm a bit free, so I had a little bit more patience to do it. But I had to do it a few times, right? Number one, because there's so little space inside. So sometimes, even though I have soldered the wire correctly, I was not able to put the board in for test fitting, and even now I don't think it's going to go in 100%. And then as I test fitted it and tried to pull it out, that kind of ruined the silicone tubing for the wire. So I'm not going to push it all the way in. It's become very obvious to me that this is going to be a two-part thing. So I have to put this in, and then I have to cut the contacts. I have measured it more or less, right? And then I have to put the keystone, I have to glue the keystone contact first, and then I have to solder it. So unlike the previous DNA75C project that I did, because of the way that was, the board comes in from the back, I could actually solder the keystone contact, everything, and then just fit in that way. It's not going to work with this one. So the other thing is that soldering this is pretty difficult, as you can see, because of the position, as I said, of the DNA60 charging port, and that made it a little bit more complicated. If it was like this, the charge USB port will be at the bottom. I think that's actually a better way to do it, at least in terms of soldering, because the wires will be parallel with each other. But now I have to put it this way, right? And once I've actually soldered everything here, as you can see, I could not put in the screen because there's some solder blocking the way. So I had to unsolder it. It was just a huge mess. But this is what I want, right? So the ground will go to the atomizer. I'm just going to cut it really short. And the fire output would go to the positive for the atomizer. The battery negative, I'll bring this down all the way to the keystone contact right there. And the battery positive will come in through here. Now the battery positive can also come in through the bottom. But that was what I soldered. I actually soldered this at the bottom because I cannot fit in here. But then coming in at the bottom, it creates an overlap of the two wires, as you would see right here, right? Creates an overlap of the two wires, and there is not enough room for the two wires. So I just wanted it to look a little bit more neater in that sense. And so I decided to bring the wire here. So, moment of truth. Well, actually not moment of truth. I've already done this. I've already tested it. Plug in the USB. And the DNA60 is actually working. So unlike the DNA75C, where in that video I said, as soon as you get your DNA75C, plug it into USB, plug it into your eScribe, and see if everything is working, especially the screen. With this, I wasn't able to do it until I finished all the soldering, got all the soldering right, and then I'm able to verify if there's any issues with my screen, and there is no issue with the screen. And the other thing I realized is that the faceplate, although it looks small, I think it actually shows you enough of the screen. So that is another huge relief for me, because I don't actually need to hack the faceplate, this one and the other one as well. That's going to save a lot of time, right? It's quite surprising because looking at it, I thought it was for a small screen. But obviously, as you can see here, right, the DNA60 screen is in such a way that it's not really centered, the screen. Let me hit the fire button again. Right, the screen isn't really centered, it's more towards the bottom. So yeah, that is one last thing to do. Everything checks out in eScribe, okay. So of course now I have to die my mod, since this is going to be a one-way ticket. I do not want to push the board in and push it back again later. The next, I'm going to remove this, die the mod, glue the keystone contacts with epoxy resin, which I showed you in the previous video, and then I'm going to push the board in, and then I'm going to solder. I'm going to cut the wires, and then I'm going to solder accordingly to the many different parts that you can see here. Definitely a little bit more challenging with the board coming from the outside. If it was from the inside, it would be a whole lot easier to do. But aesthetically, I think this one, it looks much better. Alright, so I have tried to record you know, as much as I can, but it was too difficult to record it because everything needed to be done really up close, like right up close to me, and I had to really focus on what I was doing. So I will just walk you through it, what I did. I dyed the mod, of course. Now it is racing red, as you can see, and incidentally, I think that's the exact color used by Floris himself to dye the buttons, right? So if you get the Floris white dyed red as an option, it's probably the same red that you'll find, or the same red that you see here. Racing red red synthetic dye. Put it in the pan for about 3-5 minutes, and the color is even nice. Of course, I had to wash the mod itself to make sure there's no residue on top with a dish soap, and then I also realized that for this specific color I'm not going to have any drip tips, so I sacrificed some of my white Delrin drip tips, and I dyed that as well. One here and another one here, so now we're going to have no problem to do a matchy. I've also dyed the carbon fiber panels just to bring out the red a little bit. I don't know if it worked. Maybe it did. It's hard to... Maybe, yeah, I think the red does look a bit more vibrant. Alright, so now... Not bad, eh? So, then, of course, begin the really hard work. I glued the contacts, keystone contacts, positive, negative, using epoxy resin glue. As if you want to see how that works, you can look at my previous DIY video. And once that has set, and then I put in the DNA board. But this wire right here, okay, I had to remove it because it needs to come in at a really weird angle, and I actually cut off this part, right? If you noticed before, here it was sharp, but I removed some material here to give the wire a bit more space to go inside. I don't know how you do it if it was sharp as before. It seems like the wire would need to go here and come all the way here. So yeah, very tight space. I had to remove some material, and then the wire was just too difficult to push it in. I had to remove the wire, and then I pushed the rest of it in. This wire, it's a little bit exposed, as you can see, because of the hole. As you had to, as you had to pull the wire through the hole, the silicone tube kind of just came out, so some wires exposed, and I put in my own shrink wrap here, and however it didn't quite get to the top, right? So that's a very small thing right there. We can cover that up with something else, but it was very difficult to push the board inside, right? I had to pull the wire, pull, and put the USB port. All right, and then once the board was in, it's actually not as inside as it can be. As you can see, you can still push it out, right? So that is the one thing with this. It will all be in place later once you have the buttons. It won't actually move out. But now at the moment, some cables, the wires here, because of how tense it is, how tight it is, once it has been soldered, it tends to push the board out a little bit. So yeah, you got to push it back. Now the soldering part, keystone contacts, wasn't that difficult to solder. I just had to use a lot of flux, resin flux. Put the flux right here. You can still see the flux residue. I will use some nail polish remover later to try and remove some of it. I didn't want to do it right now because it seems to also melt the epoxy. Perhaps the epoxy is not 100% set yet. So at the top as well, you can see the soldering. Oops, this one. Yeah, this is this probably has to come out a little bit. Oops, this solder has come out. Yeah, so I got to go and fix that. But this one is fine. Yeah, this one is solid. And this I need to fix. The whole idea of having to solder small areas like this, I actually burned my finger as well. It's very, very difficult to do. And then I soldered everything else here. Alright, so that should be fine. And now the board is actually working, but because I had to remove the screen multiple times to, remove some wire, solder, unsolder, and solder it back, I think I damaged the screen. So when I plug this in, now there's very little room for the USB port to move, right? Because of all the wire pushing it down. Right, so the screen initially came on, then it actually didn't work anymore after that. So now in my eScribe, let me turn on eScribe. Yeah, it does connect in eScribe. Yep, it says evolve DNA60, no problem. I don't know, man, this is so difficult. You can see because where you insert the screen is also where you solder all these wires, right? So I put in the screen initially, I soldered things out, and then I had to remove the screen because the screen just dangles here, right? It just gets in the way of everything. So then once I have soldered everything, put the board back in, this wire I had to unsolder, it came out, and then I solder it back. You can see some red stuff here. The red stuff is actually from the body. It kind of melted a little bit. And then when I have this wire in, it's almost impossible to put the screen back. You can see the amount of room with your fingers, right? It's almost impossible to attach the screen back in that tiny little slot right here, as you can see. And yeah, I think I kind of damaged it, man. I did see it turn on for a while, right? But then it's gone. Now the DNA60 documentation is nothing compared to the DNA75C documentation. Examples online for DNA60, nothing, no wiring diagram. I mean, you can find if you really Google it, but otherwise it's very, very difficult to actually get any information on the DNA60 board on how to wire, etc. The screen is fucked. Still needs to be trimmed off a little bit. And then these things would go in right here. And this is more or less how it will look. The final rendition or the final product, the final result. Not too bad, not too shabby. Right, just wish that I was a bit more careful with the screen. This is something, like I said, it would be really helpful if there was just some simple guide by Floris, Mr. Floris Delfino, so that you know which step to do first. I don't think I did things wrong here. I just did it in the wrong order sometimes, especially when it came to the screen, because you don't want to attach and detach the screen too many times. And if you end up bending it, pushing it the wrong way, it can damage. And unlike the DNA75C, this DNA60, the screen is in a really awkward position, right? As you can see, really awkward position. Perhaps if I was a pro, I should be able to do it. Now what I really should have done is unsolder the red wire, okay, and then put in the screen, because that will give me more room to put my finger in, and then solder back the red wire. Like I said, if there was a guide, not just by Floris Delfino, there's just no guide on a DNA60. It seems like it's not really that popular, or that mass market, the DNA60, which is a shame. I think DNA60s are good. I could also use this one and this. So I've soldered it back. Very hard to do this because with everything in, you have to get your solder right in there at the right angle. You have to first decide which angle to look at it and which angle to put your solder in. You don't want to melt the dowel ring. In the data sheet by by Evolve, the DNA60 datasheet, it's very, very poor, I would say. First off, they don't even show you how to insert the screen, right? And the second part is they do not talk about the USB module at all in the datasheet. Nothing, not even a mention of it. On the Evolve forum, there's a little bit of information here and there, but really it took a lot of research to get to even understand how to wire this. Probably in some secret group, some people are hoarding all the information, and and that's where everyone goes to discuss. But on the Evolve forum, it's very hard to find information on the DNA60. So most likely nobody's using it at all. So it's working now. I am very, very proud of myself. The soldering is not the prettiest, but it will do. One thing I realized with the carbon fiber door, now that the mod is red, you can actually see the gaps, and the gaps are pretty huge, man, I would say. So according to Floris, the doors are handmade or hand finished. Probably he meant hand milled. It's believable, but I think you should get it right. The gaps here, as you can see, this is a fucking huge gap. The rounding of the doors, it's I can do a better job than this, honestly. If I were to do my stab wood doors, I usually get it better, and I don't even have the tools. So yeah, the other door is fine. Let's put that on, and I'll probably go with this setup. If I have to glue in the board, I'll probably go with the clear setup. I don't want to do the carbon fiber thing. I think the clear looks good. So this door is also a little bit of gaps in the rounded parts, but not bad, I would say. Right. Now let me find a replacement screen and then put that right here and figure out how to glue this in. I think it's going to hold pretty well now that the wire is pushing everything inside. And then I would have to, once everything is finalized, I will have to glue the wires, right? Actually, they're actually pretty much solid in there, in place. Maybe I don't need to glue them after all. Just push them in again. And we are done! Right, so I waited for the replacement screen to arrive, which I got locally. And I put the screen in. And as it turned out, I didn't actually have to unsolder the battery positive wire. I just need to be a little bit more careful, and instead of trying to use my fingers, I use the tweezers to guide the screen into the slot. And that saved me a lot of time, so I didn't actually need to unsolder anything. I tried putting on the clear screen here, faceplate, but as it turns out, it kind of looks ugly after I tried to put some glue on the top, right? Because the faceplate fits in very nicely, the clear one. But the pressure of the screen, the screen's cable, when it's folded inside, it kind of pushes this thing up. So after a while, it starts to actually pop out. So I had to glue it in. Put a little bit of glue on the edges. That's it. Because I don't think this is the final stuff. I have a plan for this. I have a plan to replace the faceplate and the door with Juma, black Juma, which I plan to make myself, and that's going to be another challenge by itself. So yeah, now the buttons are nice, clicky. Wattage up, wattage down. Easy to press. Not so easy to use one finger to lock the screen. You can try. Oh yeah, actually it's possible to do that as well. Right? It's easier to use two fingers to both my thumbs. And inside, I have fitted it with a ModMaker what do you call it? The Dinky 10, Dinky 10, I guess. 10 ml juice capacity. It's the standard size ModMaker bottle in terms of diameter. It should be 17.5, but it's much taller. So it's 10 ml of juice capacity in here. The best fit I can find to maximize the space that you have inside. Other bottles would fit, but there's a lot more unused space. So this 10 ml juice capacity, and then I have lightly sanded the entire mod with a 1000 grit sandpaper in one direction to give it a nicer finish. I didn't want to do too much of it, scared that I may actually make some parts look less red than the other parts. And the carbon fiber panel had to be a lot of work for the button to actually use a file and file out and test. I was going really slow in the final stages because the button was a bit too thick at the bottom. So I had to file off a use sandpaper and remove the bottom part of the button layer by layer, and I was going very slow. I do 1 or 2 swipes in the sandpaper, and I had to put everything back, put the screen back, hold it like this, and see if I can press the button. And that is from experience, because the finishing part, the final stages, the small tiny work where it's 1/1000 of an inch kind of tolerance that you're working with, you should go really slow, because you take 1 swipe, 2 swipe, 3rd swipe, and it becomes too loose. So yeah, that took a lot of time. As for the carbon fiber itself, it's not really the best fit. You can see a gap right here, and as I showed you before, the rounded corners, right, gaps. It's not bad. It's not bad at all. The fit for the clear was definitely better. I still have the clear door, but I think this is going to be the look for now until I can do my own Juma door and also Juma front plate. And I'm very happy with this DIY from Floris Box Mods. I think it's very nice size. Feels really nice, and it looks really nice as well. Alright, let's get back on top. I'll give you my thoughts, conclusions on this DIY project. There you go. Woo! This is how it looks like inside, in case I forgot to show you. And what I have on here is the vapor knot. So the vapor knot is a 24mm RD, and you do see a little bit of overhang because of the shape of the body and the extreme contours. The edges is rounded pretty well. Alright, so yeah, if you don't mind that little bit of overhang, this should fit a 24mm just nice. So it's been a long video. I don't want to ramble on. I'm just going to tell you my thoughts on the Floris Box DNA60 project. So I initially wanted to do the DNA75C instead of the 60, but it was out of stock and I didn't want to wait, so I got the 60. No regrets. 60 is a good board if you ask me. I'm not into temp control. I know some people say the 75C or 75 is better in terms of temp control, etc, etc. But for efficiency, power efficiency, and just wattage mode, the DNA60 is pretty darn good. I think is more efficient than the 75. Is it more efficient than the 75C? I don't know. I'm not so technical, but it's a very good board. And I do not actually have any DNA60 Squonkers. 75C, yes. 75, the rest are mechanical and MOSFET. So this is one of a kind for me. Let's talk about price. The enclosure, everything else comes up to about $150 US. So the enclosure is actually pretty good price if you ask me. It's a very good price. It starts off at 49 euros for the DNA60 and also for the DNA75C, about that price. And today, I was checking the website here, it's also uploaded DNA75C enclosures made out of wood, olive wood, and I can't remember something else. 2 different types of wood. If you want a wood mod, I actually bought one. I bought 2 DNA75 DNA6C enclosures and one olive wood, and they all cost about 49 euros, the base price, before you add the engraving and the colors and etc. But it comes up to about 50 euros, 55 euros, depends on what you choose, battery type, etc. Yeah, so I got two DNA75C Orca and one DNA75C olive wood on the way to me for the next DIY project. I'm feeling very confident actually after doing this. It's like you get to the next level, you know what I mean? It's like the big boss level. Maybe not, but it's definitely challenging, I'll tell you. Anyway, the price is approved to me. The enclosure is a very, very nicely done enclosure. Even the engraving at the back is really, really nice. It's a bit thin. It makes the body a bit thin, but that's probably because of the additional 1mm on either side for the 2700 battery. If you get an 18650 version, it's probably not going to look like this. It's not that big of a deal. It is actually pretty good. I would have to say, for the Floris part, the enclosure is definitely the best enclosure I've seen for any DIY project for regulated mod. The ABM enclosure is good, it's solid, but it's huge compared to this. This is really tiny, and for a 2700 battery, it is like a high-end enclosure, right? The other enclosures, the analog box mods enclosure, it's like a strictly DIY enclosure. It's like, it's oversized, there's lots of room inside for you to, you know, put your wires in. It's very easy to disassemble, to take parts out if you get it wrong. So it's got this very DIY thing about those enclosures. This one is like it's like a high-end enclosure. It's like a one-way ticket. Once you put the wires in, etc., it's very hard to actually remove it if you want to. So it's not so very much on the DIY aspect of being able to take things out. It's like a one-way ticket, fix it and get it to look good. But it does look very good. Damn! The doors and the faceplates are a bit of a letdown. The measurements are not exactly correct, and a lot of work involved for the buttons as well. I had to get a file and file and file and file. And like I said, you have to go really slow in that part, because if you file too much, then the buttons are too loose. And the button I had to sand out at the bottom as well to get it to fit properly and to be really nice and clicky. Those things take a lot of time. But it is a DIY after all, so you're not going to expect things to fit 100% perfectly. It would help if it fits perfectly, but that's not always the case, and that's why they call it a DIY. But still, the door, I think it could be cut out a little bit more. The gap is it's a bit too much for my OCD-ness. The box enclosure is good. It's like you know, it's an Italian box, right? The Floris is Italian, so it's got the Italian way of doing it, right? It's like very rounded mod, and 22 only, 24 will have a slight overhang. Lots of Italian mods are like that, with a little bit of overhang for the 24, and compact size. So it's very, very, very nice, but it could be improved a little bit more. Not the enclosure. The enclosure is, I think the enclosure is CNC machine for sure. It fits very, very good. The USB board just fits in. Nothing required. I did have to cut a little bit of the body to put in the positive wire. That's probably optional. You probably don't need to do that if your skills are better than mine, but I found it much easier to do that so that the wire had some room instead of being, you know, needing to go in a very weird angle. I can tell you for sure that this thing, although it costs $150 US in total, minus the tools of course, it is, I really, really love it, man. Really, really love it. I can see myself doing more and more of these. If you want a DNA60, if you think this looks good with my skills, a DNA60, DNA75C, etc., I'm not going to sell this at the moment. I'm going to keep it because, like I said, I usually sell off my DIY stuff that I make. This one's a keeper for me because it's a DNA60 and I don't have any of the DNA60s. But the DNA75Cs, I'm going to create 3 of them. I will create and I will sell it. Not at a ridiculous price, at a cost price plus. There has to be the plus because these things take up a lot of time compared to doing a mechanical mod, which it takes me just 1 hour, 2 hours nowadays. Just get the contacts right and that's about it. But these things with the soldering, with all the other parts inside, it takes up a lot of time. So I have 3 more mods I'm going to do, and at least 2 of those I think I will probably sell off. If you're interested, you let me know. But it takes time, a lot of time, if you want me to do it for you. First, I got to order it, and on Floris itself, once you order, there's a wait time, up to 1 week, I think, and then ships to me. That takes another 1.5 weeks or 2 weeks, and then by the time I do it, it takes time. It takes time. Anyway, if you're interested, do let me know. It's just a close offer. I don't really plan to do this and these mods and sell it. Maybe in the future, but it's just a stepping stone for me to learn how to actually do things like this. Now, the con for this, the con for the Floris box mod is Floris. I'm sorry, Floris, if you get angry with me, but the fact is, your website needs a lot more work. There are a lot of options for the doors, for the buttons, etc. to choose from. There's like 20 different options, but there's no picture for those options. There is no explanation for those options, and I think your website needs a little bit more work in terms of a guide. And the other thing is that I understand that you see yourself only as a supplier, a manufacturer of these things, the enclosures, but the DIY squonking scene, I think it's really picking up steam, Mr. Floris. So I think maybe you should consider also selling these as a complete kit for those regular Joes like me, not modders who want to buy your enclosure and assemble it and sell it for 200 euro or 300 euros, but regular people like me who need some guidance and who maybe don't want to spend too much of money shipping small bits from a dozen different websites. It would help if it was in a kit, and then of course the cost would be much higher, but it makes a lot more sense for a regular Joe like me to just get your enclosure and with the DNA60, with the wires that is required, the keystone contacts, etc. And it will also help if on your YouTube channel, which I know you do have a YouTube channel, you would do a guide. Doesn't matter if you speak in Italian. It's just what I can see. If I can see how this is done, then I think people will be flocking to your website. Regular people like me, again, regular people like me, not the modders who are going to buy 50 enclosures, 30 enclosures at one go and flip it or sell it. But regular people like me will flock to your website because we need a guide. Without a guide, this was very, very hard to do. I almost gave up at one point of time when it came to soldering those fucking tiny wires. I thought to myself, man, I just burned $100. I just burned it. It's like, I'm never going to do this, but I just kept doing it, and it worked. May not be the prettiest soldering, but it works. But I did have a backup plan. I know of a very good guy here in Malaysia who you can send stuff to and he will fix it. So I thought to myself, if I fail, absolutely fail, I will send it to him and he will fix it for me at an additional cost. But it would help if the person, Mr. Floris, you have a guide. Just like how Analog Box Mods has their guide and it comes in a complete kit. And then you will attract a lot of people who want to DIY. It will make a lot of sense for them to come to your website and just get the kit. Not just the body, the kit with all the options. And try doing this himself. It's not that hard, actually. Well, it's not that hard. Sure, I'm sounding a bit arrogant right now. But it's not impossible to do. The difficult thing is to figure out how it's assembled. Because like I said, when you design the enclosures, obviously you have a design of where the wires should go to. That's how it looks to me, because it's already cut inside. So if you could share that on your YouTube, or at least show a finished DNA60 Big Orca in your YouTube, that would be very, very helpful. The other con is that I'm going to get some hate for this, but it's true. I mean, Floris, he takes forever to reply to you. If you send him an FB message, maybe give him a week or 2 weeks to get a reply. I don't know if he's very busy or if he's just doing this as a part-time thing or whatever. Maybe he should get some help, like someone to help him out. I don't mean it in a very mean way, but the fact is you have to wait very long to get a reply. Just a single reply from Floris on Facebook, it takes so long. And the fact that the website is a bit disorganized, lack of information, etc. I really had to do a lot of research before I hit that order button. Now, if you could make it easier for me, the regular Joe, to hit the order button faster because you have the guide and the kit, the set, etc. Man, you have a treasure, amazing mod right here that I think a lot of people would take the risk to actually buy it because you made it that much easier for them. Those are just my opinions, what I went through, but I'm happy, and that's why I got another 3 more enclosures. But there are some room for improvement, not in the product, but in the business, the education part. If that can be done, this will ultimately be, I think, the best DIY source for a regulated mod. Beautiful mod, beautiful enclosure, very sexy, tight-fitting design that I've never seen anywhere else. Well, that's all for this DIY series. After this, I might do the Orca DNA75C, but before that, because that's going to take some time to arrive, I will do MOSFET, a MOSFET Squonk mod, and this is by, the name, Cloud Laboratory, yes, Cloud Labs for short. This is the enclosure. I already have a lot of these. I have 5 of these. And it's going to require a MOSFET. Well, actually a switch FET from ModMaker. And it's going to be a very nice tiny mod. I already have all the parts. I already have the soldering skills, I think, to do this one if I could do the DNA60. It's going to be a very nice, sexy looking mod. Top fire with a ModMaker, recess, a catch cup. You can see I have 5 of these. Time to get busy. Okie dokie, no more smoky.
Wow.